Nature is filled with surprises, and this year I was caught off guard by something I had never seen before. Baby red foxes with white legs. This is the third year that I've been following foxes on the wildlife homestead. Since moving here, it's been a bit of an up and down ride with them. In the first year, we had the adults bring their 5 kids to live under our garage. I couldn't have asked for a better situation. Being able to observe them growing up right outside of our door was definitely one of my favorite moments here. But in the second year, we barely saw the foxes. I think I only saw the babies a handful of times. You may remember we even had to bring one to a rehab center after finding it unconscious in the middle of the road. With 2 completely different years, I wasn't sure what to expect this time around. I don't see the foxes all that much during the winter, so I do rely on the trail cameras to see what's going on. In early February, courtship behavior had already begun. Since females are only in estrus for a very short window, usually just 2 to 5 days, scent marking, vocalizations, and close-range companionship become especially important. During this time, males and females are often seen traveling together, with the male shadowing the female closely. Despite the adult foxes showing up every few days, it was late May and I still hadn't seen any babies. It was feeling more and more like year 2, where we may only get a few glimpses of the young. But luckily, by early June, every morning I'd wake up to signs that the kits were here. At first, it was little things like pots being knocked over, tiny droppings, or finding my plant tags chewed up. Eventually, I found a moose foot in our driveway and some bones in the forest, so it seemed like they were coming around more often. I also started to see freshly dug entrances under our shed, so I set up a camera to see what was going on under there. We had a good mix of species, but ultimately it was the foxes that spent the most time under here. I was surprised to see the adults would also find a way to squeeze under the shed. I'm thinking for next year I could build a larger box for them and attach it to the side of the shed. I don't think they'd use it as their main den, but it could give them a more comfortable place to rest when they bring the kits around. To this point, I'd only catch quick looks of the babies as they'd hide in the taller vegetation, so nothing looked out of the ordinary. But that's until I got this video under the shed. Although the back legs were a little muddy, they were clearly different. I've been watching red foxes since I was a kid, and I can't remember ever seeing a wild one with white legs like this. Out of curiosity, I went back to my footage of the foxes from the first year to compare their colors, and all of them had darker legs and overall darker coats. So why did this year's foxes have white legs? Well, the most likely explanation is a genetic condition known as piebaldism, which is a condition that causes patches of fur or feathers to lose their pigment. This is different than leucism that's more commonly seen in birds, because piebaldism only affects certain areas of the body, which creates these distinct white patches, while leucism typically causes a more uniform, washed-out appearance across the entire animal. For birds, it tends to affect the darker feathers that are brown, gray, or black. In this evening grosbeak, you can see it's mostly white, but the yellow feathers aren't affected. One of the nice things about the foxes having these patterns on their legs is it made it so much easier to identify each one. I tried doing this the first year and I struggled quite a bit because all of their coats were just so similar. This year, all I had to do was study the white patterns and give them a nickname that described their pattern. By doing this, I was able to identify 5 different fox kits. The first one has white going halfway up its legs, so I nicknamed it Socks. The second one has a bigger white blotch on its left leg than its right, so that's Lefty. And there's two that have white almost up their entire legs, kinda like they're wearing pants. One has a patch of its regular coat on the back of its right leg, and the other has a patch on the front of its left leg. So I named their pattern Back Pocket and Front Pocket. And then there's Waldo. At first glance, I thought he was the only kit that had a typical Red Fox coat. But in a few clips where he lifts his legs, you're able to see a bit of white on the bottom of his back left paw. Since it's hard to find, I figured Waldo was a fitting nickname. Now these aren't meant to be great names by any means, but they're just meant to describe the pattern so I know when I see a kit if it's one that I've already seen before or if it's a new one. And I was happy to do that because putting in the time to identify each one made every encounter feel more meaningful. There was something special about being able to recognize them, not just how many were around like in previous years, but who they were. After seeing them on the cameras for a few days, there were definitely two places they liked to hang out the most. The first was under our shed, and the second was this groundhog hole that was dug beside our garage last fall. It's not active, but the female who dug it returns to it now and again. And every single time it looks like she picks up the scent of the foxes, scans the area, and decides it's best to move on. If they were able to catch it, a groundhog this size would be a great meal for the family, but they tend to focus on smaller prey items which they would bring back in mouthfuls. The adults were doing a great job at hunting because I was finding dead rodents dotted around the whole property. Like we saw in the first year, when the adults come back with food, the young usually try to grab as much as they can and eat it before their siblings realize what's happening. If they can't eat another bite, they'll try to hide the rest for later. This behavior actually led to me finding a new species for the wildlife homestead. In one clip, Lefty was happily chowing down on a rodent under the potting shed. The body shape looked different than the mice and voles and shrews that the adults usually feed the kits. With larger claws and a chunkier body, it looked to me like a mole, but I definitely wasn't confident with the ID. Sure enough, almost a month later, I found half a carcass of a star-nosed mole, the first one I've ever seen. The bizarre thing was, although it was dead, this mole was on the move. When the young hide the rodents, they're ultimately trying to hide it from their siblings. But little do they know that these boreal burying beetles are just as likely to steal their food. Drawn in by the scent of decay, the beetles arrive within hours. They'll scavenge the cached prey and strip the carcass to turn it into a nursery to raise their young. Clinging to these small beetles are even tinier mites. They aren't your typical parasitic mites, but rather phoretic mites that use the beetles to hitchhike to new food sources. In exchange for the free ride, the mites begin hunting fly eggs and maggots, protecting the beetle's future offspring from competition. But a carcass out in the open like this is no safe place for the beetles to raise their young. So in a remarkable display of strength and coordination, they begin dragging the mole away into the leaf litter to bury it, out of reach from scavengers and ready to raise the next generation. When the young foxes return for their meal, they probably have no idea that they were bested by a beetle, but it's little lessons like this that prepare them for an unpredictable life in the forest, where food is never guaranteed and competition comes in all shapes and sizes. This is just one small example of how the foxes help shape the ecosystem around them. The more I watched them, the more examples I was able to find. For one, our red squirrel population has never been this high, and it really showed this spring. More so than usual, the squirrels have been aggressively targeting bird nests. It seemed like almost every day bluebirds, robins, and grackles were chasing them away from their nests. So when the foxes begin to thin the squirrel population, they involuntarily give some relief to nesting birds, and they help the remaining red squirrels too by reducing competition for the limited food that'll get them through the next winter. When they catch mice, chipmunks, and voles, those rodents leave behind empty burrows, which are quickly taken over by amphibians, snakes, bumblebees, and other invertebrates. Even their droppings don't go to waste. They're scavenged for nutrients and minerals by a number of different insects. It just goes to show how important these foxes are in the landscape and how many species benefit from their presence, whether they know it or not. After 2 months of watching the foxes, I'd get a bittersweet feeling every time I saw them. Earlier in the season, they'd stay here for a few hours a day, and now they were only here for a few minutes. Seeing how fast they were growing and how quickly their behavior was changing, I knew it wouldn't be long until they were gone. They were more alert, independent, and more territorial when the adults would bring back food. In just a few weeks, they'll be elusive and move deeper into the forest. By the autumn, they'll be almost indistinguishable from the adults, except in this case for their unmistakable bright white legs. Once they leave to carve out territories of their own, I don't know if I'll ever see them again, but at least for a little while, I was grateful to watch the first chapters in their story unfold here on the Wildlife Homestead.